Uncontrollables. Outrageous? Sometimes. Thoughtful? Maybe. Offensive? Probably. Fabulous? Always.
All right, so this is episode, I want to say 24 of the Uncontrollables.
I have let this go on way too long.
Already, yeah. Let's just go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll call it a show. Sorry, Gary, you're gonna have to find another thing to fill an hour's worth of time. This has been 14 seconds of the Uncontrollables. Goodbye.
Screw you, Gary.
But this is we're not live today, sadly. We that will be something we'll do a lot more of in the future. You can guarantee that because that was awesome. Thanks for anybody that called in, and I'm a little disappointed that more people haven't subscribed to the show, so you best get all your friends on doing that. But today, we're doing just kind of regular interview thing. With me, I've got Chris Spangle.
Holla.
He is the head honcho at the WAL radio network.
WAL-radio.com to subscribe to all of Maya's podcasts, or she will hit you with a hatchet.
That's pretty much. And then I also have with me my father. Say hi.
Hello.
Didn't want to be named or anything else, but that's okay. And we're just kind of going to go over a little bit about perspective on politics. As far as Dad's 60 years old, been around for a while, seen a lot of different things, have seen, politics throughout the many years, and you've been a listener. You listened to Rush Limbaugh for pretty much since he started, right?
1988.
Yeah. So you've at least been pretty much following politics, not maybe as closely as we have in the past couple of years, but really following politics for a good portion of your life, correct?
Correct.
And then we also are going to use Chris here as a
Filler.
a filler, because he's a little bit older than me, and he's been involved with politics for a little bit longer than I have.
Yep.
I mean, he was a little warmongering Republican for a while.
Yes, I hated Mexicans and Arabs and loved Ronald Reagan. He's the man.
I want to slap you so hard right now.
Go statism.
But I guess to really kind of the start is we were talking a little bit right before we started recording, and how would you sum up what life in America was when you were like in your teens, in your early 20s, as far as what politics were like and how you maybe viewed politics and how everyone else around your age saw politics? I mean, was it something you didn't care about, or was it something that didn't really affect you that much, so you didn't really need to think about it?
Well, not speaking about myself, but just society in general. When you grew up in a small town or on a farm or whatever, you weren't really informed. I mean, back then, your only connection was a newspaper that was delivered every morning, and it was 3 days in arrears on news. You didn't have the radio broadcast. You didn't have the cable vision. You didn't have computers. You didn't have anything that could keep you informed on today's political events. And when your only selection was back then basically was a presidential election. I don't think even the state representatives and mayoral elections in towns or whatever, there was no emphasis put behind them. Most people at that time are kind of self-appointed. So the only political parties, of course, were Republican, Democrat, and they were ever changing. Not to ramble on, but when you look at today's Democrats as compared to yesterday's Democrats, which were the original Ku Klux Klan and KK Bird and the rest of that constituency down south, look how that's changed. Now the very people that they tried to ostracize from society, they're claiming that they actually have propped up, and they're getting the most benefit from that party. So I mean, it would take months and days to explain the political transition from then to today, but you didn't have a lot of the factors, and they are political. Unemployment back then was probably 2%, because after the war, and I was born in 1953, parents then and people growing up were guaranteed a job. There were factory jobs, blue collar jobs. You were guaranteed a lifelong pension, health care benefits. So there were no freebies, goodies, handouts that people depend on today just to survive. So I think from a political standpoint, the hardest thing for me was in growing up till today is, how do you make a political decision based on what? On what criteria? And what I'm seeing is whatever criteria benefits me the most or goes after a group of people that I'm opposed to, that's who I vote for. Even though I'm much better informed, I know much more. But what we've gotten to, and I'm going to ramble on here for a minute. When I grew up in a town of 7,000, you had Andy Griffin as your police chief. You had a police chief and one officer. You absolutely had a controlled society. You had no locks on your doors. You didn't have car alarms. You didn't have and this is going to relate to politics, but you didn't have any part of society that didn't respect each other. So we've come a long way. If you jump to today, now we are pre-war Germany. We are absolutely 1929, 1933 Germany, where we've given society all the help they could ever want and not need as their jobs, as their income, as their sustenance, while we've ostracized the people that got them and the country and people to that point. So we've come full circle from an openness, a freedom, to total oppression. And that all is based on politics. So you have now three parties, Libertarians, Republicans, and Democrats. And there isn't a nickel's worth of difference between all of them, in my opinion, as it relates to how you go to war, how you go to market, how you transition from a total dependent community to an independent community.
That makes perfect sense, is that things take time, and I can see, as far as back then, I think there's always a correlation I try to make between there not being a whole bunch of laws and people doing well. I mean, you're talking about back in the 50s and 60s, there weren't the amount of laws and fines and restrictions on people, yet people behaved better. As we got more laws, more restrictions, more permits, more fines, more cops, things get worse and worse. I wonder if anybody else has ever seen that correlation. Have you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll speak just the 10 years that I've been watching. In the last, well, probably more 15 to 20 years that I've been paying attention to politics, you've gone from the baby boomers just creeping into politics with Bill Clinton to now totally running everything. And you had the greatest generation, people like Bob Dole, people, sort of in the generation of my grandparents who were running things, and they were much more civil to each other. There was a more common ground. There was more of a willingness to negotiate. I know sometimes libertarians think that negotiation is always bad, but that's generally how government works. You try to compromise. And now we're just at a point where, there was a focus on solutions, it seemed, back then. And maybe it just was because I was a neophyte and a kid. But now everyone is looking for someone to blame. Everyone is complaining about the problem and complaining about how things are broken and how this has happened and who should we blame. And there's really not a focus on solutions. There's really not a focus on civility. It's a focus on whose fault is it.
I would blame the fact that in my tenure and growing up and in my generation, the fact that the lackadaisical attitude and the openness to a huge amount of freedom contributed to where we are today. Mm-hmm. And it's because no society lasts forever. And I think when you have no restrictions, then the narcissism of politics feeds on laws and restrictions.
Well, and a lot of the problems, the NSA, the DHS, the CISPA, all that is only possible because it's being tacked on and added on and kind of made because of laws and bills they passed back in the 50s and 60s. When I talked about the immigration laws and things like that, a lot of things changed up in the 60s, and you really see a huge growth of government happen after probably about the 40s. After the war, they didn't do a whole lot necessarily there, and then they just started passing bill after bill after bill. And if you look at what the foundation is for everything Obama does, for everything Bush did, for everything our Congress is doing, that shit was passed back in the 60s. and it's been used and continually growing. I mean, back in your day, there was maybe 100 SWAT type raids back in like the 70s, maybe 100 a year, maybe.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that, but we didn't know what a SWAT team was. A SWAT team to us would have been so foreign. Even actually, again, any police department or any reference to militarization would have frightened, because you had 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have frightened everyone because that would not have been acceptable. The National Guard wasn't called out. I mean, we had the riots of '68 that I was actually involved in as a kid, and that was totally terrifying. But that was basically quelled because people would not tolerate people being out of control. It wasn't handled by massive police forces and militarization. But if, again, in my reference back to pre-war Germany, you had unemployment rates in Germany at the time at 40 to 45%. So once they gave people like you mentioned, Homeland Security jobs, FEMA jobs, all the different government entities back then, everyone had a job. So what did they do? Whatever the government told them to do, and oppressed the rest of the people there. We are, and I hate to say this, we are the modern day Jews.
I could definitely go with that. It's a correlation where, we sit here as libertarians try to convince all these people to shrink the size of government when half the people we're talking to are employed by the government, or I'd say more than half are either employed or somehow rely on the government to survive. Not saying that, we just don't have to care about those people and they should go starve to death. I mean, the government destroyed our economy and everything else, but it's kind of feels fruitless a little bit that if you're working for the government now, you're not going to get a job with those benefits outside of that. You're kind of stuck in this hole where there's really no choice. That hasn't always been the case, but what happened to all the baby boomers and all their skills and all their greatness, supposedly, where they had jobs? How can we correlate over time? What would you say is the primary cause for all those jobs going away, where we now have to have all these government jobs? I mean, what do you think's the underlying cause of that?
Well, government intervention, OSHA. I mean, a lot of the organizations that don't allow a company to make a profit. Now, it's reported, like the oil companies, that they're huge profit centers, but there was so much restriction, so much regulation involved in all of the companies. The old days, Frigidaire, NCR, GM, all the huge plants that provided people for a 40-hour week, a basically easy week, a good living, a great pension, and health care. What happened was regulation. So if companies can't make a profit, or they absolutely are having the boot on the neck principle, then they have no option but to move to somewhere where it is profitable.
I would say it's entitlement. I think the baby boomers, you really see a postmodern view of the world where there is no truth, and so your principles and your values are great for you. It doesn't matter that sound economic policy is as enforceable as gravity. The path that we're on is unsustainable, and that's just the truth. But the truth doesn't matter because you can just reject it as false. And so you get politicians going up against each other. Well, one says austerity, moderate, and then the other says free stuff. Well, that sounds great to the average entitled baby boomer and millennial. I don't have a memory of what the Great Depression was like. My grandmother does, and she's 85, and she votes, but she knows what the Depression was like, and she can tell me about it, but it's mythical almost, it's fiction almost, because, oh yeah, Grandma, you had it tough. Well, when she moved into her first apartment with my grandfather, they were so excited to get a spool, an old wire spool to use as a coffee table. And I said, you had an old spool as your coffee table? And she said, yep, for 5 years. That was our coffee table in our brand new apartment, which was 500 square feet, and we were so happy. We don't have a concept of austerity in the millennial generation, and the boomers gave that to us, and I apologize to your dad, but I blame the baby boomers for most of our misery, and I'm I'm anti-boomer.
Well, I think I just said that. I do blame I blame my father's generation who came through the Depression, because it was, we're going to make it better, we're going to make it right, we're going to, by giving entitlements, austerity, whatever you want to use as terminology, and now your generation is in a huge morass because you can't dig yourself out of a mess that has no options.
Well, and that's the thing, is that Social Security. I mean, look at the FDR administration. Look at all the policies that came from World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression, and the little miniature depression back in the teens. You look at all of that, and you see all the laws they passed, everything like that. And so the baby boomer generation had the chance to fight back against that stuff. The generation before them, that ended up going through the Depression. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you lose a lot of oomph and power and ability to fight politics when you're starving to death, but that's understandable. But so they allowed all that stuff to come in, and they begged for a lot of it. I mean, you think of the socialist talk today and the Tea Party socialists. I mean, go back to the early 1900s. Everybody was a socialist. It was cool.
Well, what cured the Depression? A war.
A war.
And that's what'll cure this. And as sad as that is, that's the only way to restore, and what it will restore is the same morass.
Let's wait a little bit towards the end to talk about what the final solution is. Whoa.
Don't use that term.
Don't use that term. What a fix for this our problem is.
Because I agree with you. I think I agree with your dad. We're not in 1929. We're in the late 30s. We're in the 38, 39. And I think some things have happened that are huge, huge troublesome signs for us and where we're headed. So, you can't have a society where there are more people on food stamps and government benefits than are working in the private sector.
Russia's GDP right now is 1%. Oh, well, back up here. Their unemployment's at 5.2%. Their GDP is excellent. Between Russia and China's growth ratio is where the United States was in 1950, booming. We have no way out of or gaining back what we've given away. Because you asked the question earlier, why did my generation relinquish that when we had it made? Really had it made, and could have passed on and passed down those same benefits and principles and jobs and relationships.
You look at Detroit Detroit is a huge canary in the coal mine. It is your largest employers in the 60s were U.S. Steel, were car manufacturers, GM, Ford. The largest employers in America today are Walmart, IBM, McDonald's, UPS, Target, Kroger, Sears. What GE and Citigroup and Albertsons, the food chain.
The part-time jobs.
Please tell me which one of those actually, other than IBM, which one of those actually create anything? And IBM is actually
GE,
more of a consultant. GE.
That's about it. And they're most 90% of their crap's government contracts.
So here's and this is the most source from the SEC. Walmart employs 2.1 million people. Number 2 is IBM at 436,000. So your part-time, low-wage, low-benefit service jobs are what our economy is created on. And
we do have a service sector economy.
Yeah. I mean, and so if you read Peter Schiff's book, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, the Chinese are not our enemy. I think the Russians are really the people that we need to worry about as global competitors, because the Chinese at the moment depend on us just as much as we depend on them for cheap goods. And, at a certain point, China will figure out that they have a large enough middle class that they can serve with their own goods and they don't need to ship them over to the Americans anymore. And we're already seeing signs that people are losing faith in our currency. In God we trust is really, we have no trust. We have no trust in our government. We have no faith in our leaders. When Barack Obama says, he doesn't come out and say he's going to reform the NSA. He comes out and says, you just need to trust it more. Well, that doesn't work like that anymore. You're too corrupt. The whole system is headed for a very large reset. I don't know when, but at some point it will reset itself, and it will probably reset itself as the result of a war. And it's not going to be good for those who believe in more freedom and less government.
Well, that is a possibility. I mean, there's plenty of us out there that don't want to have a war where a bunch, millions of people die for no reason, and then the government steps in and creates even more controls and is in fact in control of more of our industry and our economy and providing things. I mean, it's to kind of take this back away from the whole end point again, is with the whole idea of government anyways, is that why are we forced, why am I at 26 forced to live under what previous generations have either screwed up, not thought about, or given me? I mean, it's one of those things that, you look back at the generation before you, Dad, and you see what they did, and you're forced to live under that. You're forced to struggle and fight against what people before you did. You had no choice, no matter. You didn't get a chance to agree to it. You didn't sign the social contract, any of that. I mean, do you think the way these things work and the way our government works is a good thing, where you just have to deal with what the people before you did? So moving forward, if we do have this big war and we do have all this other stuff and we keep allowing things to keep going, is that really fair to younger generations? Shouldn't we maybe do something else?
Yeah, no. To answer the latter first, it's not fair, but it's a fact of life, and the war isn't the end game. First of all, when people talk about billions dying, that's almost like a biblical prediction. I don't see anyone dying. I mean, from the cause of war, other than it's going to be a technical war, and it's going to be based on financial markets. And it's not going to be Russia by itself or China by itself. It's going to be accumulations of huge financial paradigms.
We're talking about like BRICS.
Yes.
Which, for anybody not that doesn't know what BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have created kind of a coalition economies. So that's what you're basically saying, is that, new emerging countries like those countries mentioned are really starting to grow, and their population's booming, and they're getting more middle class. So you're basically saying they'll just basically push us out of the way, and we won't have to necessarily fight a war, but it will be a struggle of survival in the markets.
Exactly. I mean, if you think of we talked about the Depression, that was one half of the nation standing in line for a little bit of water, some soup, and a piece of cheese. I mean, men that had respect and courage at one time, albeit most of it was under a false paradigm, but they deserted their families and did whatever they had to do for their individual self to survive. That's what you're going to see the United States being. You can't pay off a $17 trillion deficit. You can, and when, as Chris said, our dollar's not worth anything now. It's been 96% depleted. So when you have no more buying power, what are your options to be taken care of? And you will get the pittance or the crumbs of those countries. And this isn't something that's going to happen in a decade. We're 2 to 3 years away from this coming to a head.
I would disagree with the BRIC countries taking over, other than China. The American currency is the blood within the financial system across the globe, and you're going to have a global depression. And China is the one that will have the resources, and Russia has a lot of resources. America does too. And India has resources plus population, but China has the population and the resources and the money to really go in and try and reestablish the global economic system.
I know we're off on financial markets, and that's probably not where you want to go, but it has to do with political. But again, I'll correct you on one thing. Russia is the largest exporter of natural gas today. They're the largest importer for oil in their oil fields. They have the largest gold reserves of any nation, even greater than China. So one thing people aren't considering, you're going to have Russia, China, and then the Asian Rim, which would be, again, you're going to have to include India in that, and Indochina, and Pakistan. The problem is the world's resources no longer exist in the United States. Without those, if you have nothing to sell and you're only buyers, and you're not creating any finances for the country to sustain itself, with obviously we aren't. We haven't even seen the onslaught of the boomers, guys my age, going to start collecting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, on and on and
Well,
on.
and before we get too far into that, is the BRICS countries, they are a coalition. They are contractually together on things, and they've done it very well. Is China's a powerhouse, Russia's a powerhouse in different regions, and you've got Brazil, which is the powerhouse down in South America. And between them, what they're doing and cohabitating as far as like China buying up all the mineral resources in Africa. I mean, they basically shut Japan down for a little while because they rare earth metals. They basically said, no, we're not going to sell them to you anymore. And it almost completely destroyed Japan that no one really talked about. And so between all of them, they all have something to bring to the table. And they're doing a very good job at going. And it doesn't matter what the dollar wants to do or isn't going to do. When you control all the resources and you have all the manufacturing, which is something America has nothing of. I know they talk about we still have this or that, but compared to our we don't have the ability right now to go build a new factory. It would take 15 years between the permits, everything else, to build a new factory. It would take 20 years to get your contracts to go maybe dig for some minerals or ores or maybe get them shipped in this country by the time you're done with taxes, permits, and everything else. You're looking at 30 years to start up a new factory here. If you're a new company, anything else, and I mean these things take a long time. By then you're behind. You know money's already changed hands, and it's pointless. So America, to me, economically, because of the system we're under, will never again be a global player. We're dwindling now. I don't even know how we're still holding on, but we do not have the ability to ever increase our output against all these other countries growing because we have such restrictions.
See, I disagree. I think you've got one gigantic factor that you're not adding into this, which is the populations of the BRIC countries. You know, China is on the verge of an industrial revolution where we were 100 years ago, and their population is far more vast than ours. India and Indonesia are far more vast than ours, far higher unemployment, and same in Russia. Same in Brazil. You just saw 100,000 people marching in the streets of Brazil. You know, people are already hungry and desperate there, and those countries are going to spend a lot of resources trying to quell those populations. And here in America, you're going to have unrest. There is no doubt, but we are 100 years more advanced than places like China. And you will have a large reset that will take place, but you shouldn't count America out. Our economy is still, as far as resources go, it's very, very vast. I mean, it's not that we'd never be a global player, it's that we may not be the only world superpower anymore.
And it also comes down to the fact that the countries we're talking about, they really don't have problems about murdering hundreds of thousands of people. That's the difference between here and there, is that they will continue to ride. I'm not saying it'll be good, it'll be moral or just, but they have no problem. You know, China will start up another Mao soon eventually, and they'll kill off a couple 100 million people, guaranteed. They don't care. They do things. They already have this huge government that's pushing it through. It'll eventually run itself out, but what America has is we have over $100 trillion with the unfunded liabilities. We have one thing we have working against us is we have a massive land mass. So does China, but obviously more people. Is that we're so spread out here. That's one of the costs in our country is how spread out we are, how far across we have to go. And then, like I said, the time constraints. For anything to change, it's a 20-year lag for us. For all the other countries, it's almost an instantaneous change. Where maybe in 100 years or so, we'll be okay, and we'll be able to maybe, sit up there with the big boys. But I think for now, we're going to be right in the back seat for a very long time, because you look at what the 50s were like. You look at the fact that you could go out and hire some people, get a loan, get some investors, and open a factory. Like back in your day, Dad, you could open a factory pretty easily and just kind of go with it and make a product, everything else, and just you could create employment and create product. I mean, now you don't see that. I mean, do you think that's one of the big factors is time and how you understand markets, that if you don't jump into a market at the right time, then, I mean, if you're lagged by 20 years, you're pretty much behind, right?
Well, I grew up in the business world where a lot of people I know that were very successful, this goes back 20, 25 years ago, figured it out and decided that the United States would no longer be economically independent, we're not even remotely close to a superpower, by the way, so that's a total misconception. But if you go down to the Bahamas, Grand Bahama Island, and you look at the largest shipping container port in the world, which, if you don't believe me, Google it, largest runway in the world, it takes in, when the Chinese took over the Panama Canal, and I don't want to ramble on here, they brought in all those container ships with all those goods that, going back to what I said 25 years ago, all the smart people I know started taking everything they could find in the United States and taking it over to China, i.e. we know someone who owns a novelty shop, and bought a port over there and bought a slip and started manufacturing even trinkets and trash and everything over there. I don't care whether it has to do with plumbing, electrical. It's shipped into a container point in Grand Bahama. It then pays no tariff. It's 54 miles off the coast of Florida. They pay no tariffs to bring goods in to the United States. If people don't think we're in a worse state of affairs economically and that there's a way out of this, you need to study economics, because we are not by any means, shape, or form a superpower. If you read the news yesterday, Japan has an aircraft carrier now. Funny.
Yeah.
Weren't allowed to have a military. 2, Russia now has the only submarine that is absolutely science cannot be detected, with over 20 multiple warheads on it.
Well, and we know China has subs that we can't keep track of, and we don't know where they port them at either.
Russia just finished a new Sukhoi aircraft that can wipe out the Raptor in about 2 seconds. So we're no superpower. First of all, financially, we are totally broken. There is no way out of this morass unless you would absolutely forgive all debt tomorrow and nationalize it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way out of it, but our economy is still twice the size of China. And number one, the GDP is 7.2. It's 7.2 to 14.9. I mean, we're twice the size in GDP that China is. And our military, we spend more on our military than pretty much every nation in the world combined. I mean,
I was in the military, and I like to follow a lot of military stuff. And you know what happens? We get these the F-35s and stuff like that. We've spent literally billions upon billions of dollars researching and building things we shelved that we've never used. I mean,
does anyone here know what we export relative to military hardware? And if you take that military spending, 70% of it, and you can check the facts and figures. And first of all, go back to GDP. You don't have any facts on GDP because we don't report the correct GDP in this country. So how it relates to Russia and China is totally wrong. But as far as our contract spending on whether it be Pratt & Whitney, Grumman, doesn't depend on who it is, the military, McDonnell Douglas, most of that stuff is provided in other countries as military hardware.
Mm-hmm. And then we're spread out all over the place. And then, but the thing is that I always go back to is having this big GDP is cool and all, but we don't own anything. We have nothing to back that up. We're a giant fiat GDP. We ship all of our oil in because we only play with OPEC. We have many mineral resources here that, again, it's a time thing. It would take 30, 40 years for us to even get to the minerals because we've closed down mines, we've collapsed mines, we haven't allowed people to build things. So it would take decades to start getting this stuff out and then processed because we don't have any factories to process anymore. We don't own any mineral rights. We don't have any stores. We've sold everything off. We don't produce anything on our own. So we're constantly having to buy that stuff. So right now we're just kind of on the curve where, we've already peaked. We're on our way downward. It's not going to get better. China, Russia, all of them, they own and control so much more than we ever could. And since we don't manufacture anything anymore, we're a service-based economy, and they're starting to build up their factories and the education of their workers to be able to make and process their own products. What do we got? What do we really have? When you consider all of those things, that if they start having more skilled workers and they no longer need our labor force, and we don't manufacture and we don't actually mine anything, what do we have? I mean, are they going to come over here to eat McDonald's and go shopping?
You forget one thing. We build prisons to house all the people that are going to not be able to support themselves.
Right. Well, we could become a giant. We could be the next Australia. We'll just build a bunch of prisons. And by the way, I learned something today I didn't know, is that prisons have to be built next to a train track. I did not know that. That's a law. Prisons have to be built next to train tracks. Yeah, that's weird. I wonder why. Trains, prisons, people. That's
Well, there's a great documentary called The House I Live In, and it makes a point that we have purposely increased drug sentences because we've destroyed our economy. We just take the bottom 15% of our economic society. They engage in the only reliable economic system that they can, which is drugs, and then we just warehouse the bottom 15% of our society, and then we make it acceptable by demonizing them and saying that they are bad and that they're the cause of all of our misery and that criminals need to be treated like criminals and that drugs are the result of all of your evils. It's a very, very interesting documentary called The House I Live In. You can get it on YouTube, you can get it on Netflix, and there's a lot of truth to that, that we just treat people, drug offenders, like pariahs, and they make the point that, this is similar to what other totalitarian nations like Hitler did to the Jews, like Stalin did to the Yugoslavians, that they're the cause of all of your misery. So...
Well, and on that point, that's a huge cost to us as far as trying to house all those people and what we do to those people's futures and their lives and the kids and everything else we plan to destroy them. But on that point, I guess looking back over time, what you grew up in going through the 70s, everything else back in the 50s, and I mean you were right on the cusp of when they stopped growing hemp and a lot of different crops and everything else, but. How do you explain what happened with drugs and with people and talking about drugs? So
you ask me to explain prohibition?
Well, yeah. Well, okay. In your eyes, how have you seen the prohibition of many different substances happened over the years? I mean, really, how? I mean, we went from alcohol being prohibited back in the 20s and everything, or to the 30s, and then. Now we've done it to a bunch of other things. How do you think they convinced everybody to be that dumb about it? And with the drug war going from, back in the 70s or so, maybe less than 100 drug raids or not drug raids or any kind of raids at all by the cops to over 80,000 SWAT team raids a year. That's almost 220 a day.
Well, it sounds to me like the pharmaceuticals created jobs for people.
I mean, are you saying this is, we all can know that, like, industry does things, and DuPont and a couple other companies were instrumental in getting hemp banned because it was a competitive product. But, I mean, you're basically saying that corporatism and collusion between the market and the government by forcing people to create jobs with different things like intellectual property and everything else on prescriptions have forced us to go after any kind of natural means or non-natural means, like meth and cocaine and all that. But basically that the pharmaceutical industry has created the drug war.
Absolutely. And again, as Chris touched on, the thing I forget what the relationship is, but how many people does it take to handle that one prisoner? If you go back into the arrest teams, you go back into, like you said, the SWAT teams, you go back into the judges, the lawyers, how big of a system does that support? It's astronomical. So it always kind of gets me, and I don't understand how the big pharmaceuticals produce so much product that it creates a whole society of sellers out there to the public where they can get their hands on these drugs that are allegedly just produced for people who really need them. And that relates into then supporting these huge police forces, militarization of police forces, huge prison systems, the court system. You can go on and on and on.
Detroit wouldn't be broke if the drug war didn't exist. There's a couple documentaries. One is called D-Force, and the other one is Detroitopia, I think it is. Both on Netflix, but D-Force really examines the impact of the drug war in Detroit. And every year, the amount of police abuse cases that they settle is equal to the budget gap that they have. And if they didn't have to settle all these police abuse cases, usually linked to drugs, then they would be able to close their budget gap, and they wouldn't have gone broke. There's also, you think about the amount of money that it takes for the police forces, the court system, the county jails, the city police, then the warehousing of prisoners, essentially. That is a huge cost, and the only reliable economic system in most of Detroit, in a city that has 50% unemployment, is drugs, is the selling of drugs. And people don't do it because they're bad people. People don't sell drugs because they love to sell drugs most of the time. They do it because they've got kids to feed. They've got to feed themselves. They're hungry. They're looking for a way to exist, and this is the easiest way to exist. And so they start dealing drugs at 12. It is an immoral system. We take these kids who are 12, they start into the family business, they get busted for pot, they go in, they spend 6 months to a year with a professional criminal, teaching them how to apply their trade effectively. They get out, they can't find a job to pay their parole payments, they create a worse crime, they go in for longer, they come out, they go out, commit more, and it's just a cyclical thing that we have created by allowing the drug war to exist. It's one of the largest causes of our problems, and we don't do anything about it because drug users are bad. They're sick. They're mental.
You asked me about relating back to me being 60 and my age. Well, we didn't have any drugs. We didn't have any drug war. We had one police captain, chief in the town I lived in. The average town only had 2 or 3 police. They usually handled the once a year break-in or the wreck on the street from. We had high-powered cars. When I went to high school, we had one kid died from a car wreck. One kid accidentally hung himself in a barn. You didn't have locks on your doors. You didn't have drugs. You didn't have all of these laws now that are created to oppress people. And but we didn't have. I can't even speak to that because drugs didn't come around even in the 70s. In Woodstock and all that. You had pot and you had mescaline and you had some hallucinogenic mushrooms and stuff like that, but you had no Oxycontin. You didn't have any of the painkillers.
You didn't have the pills.
No,
we've had shrooms and hemp and chasing a dragon. We've had all kinds of stuff. Since
Not us this afternoon. I mean,
no, there was no Enlightenment tools used today. But it's when would you say that you first started fearing a police interaction? Not necessarily, afraid, but when did you first start? Like around what period would you say that cops no longer became friendly people? They became people you avoided at all costs.
I'm going to say it started in the 80s because even in the 80s you had local sheriffs they were just friendly people. First of all, you didn't call the cops for every little thing, but usually you had a town marshal or somebody that, even in larger towns, you had a very respectful police force, and people not only respected the police, but they knew amongst themselves they could pretty much handle any issue that came up. But again, I grew up in a generation where we took our guns to school and leaned them in the corner to go rabbit hunting after class.
My God!
I mean, we were respectful of everyone and everything. You never had a gun death violence. You would never thought about a shoot 'em up like they had in Connecticut. I mean, that just did not happen. But if you'll research all that, most of it is drug related. And again, Chris, you talked about it when all the drug laws and everything have created this morass.
The reason we have the drug laws is because Nixon needed a way to take the heat off of himself in 72. And so the best way for him to take the heat off of himself was to start a war on drugs. It tested really well with the quote unquote the builder generation or the greatest generation. They are the ones that thought, these darn kids in 71, 72, all the hippies smoking weed and they had bought into over the years all of the paranoia about things like pot, and then you started to hear about crack cocaine in the 80s, and that's when Reagan really ramped up the Just Say No campaign, and Clinton related it back to crime. The whole thing was created for political purposes. It wasn't good public policy. It was bad public policy that just tested well for people.
Well, and then the pharmaceutical companies and the industries jumped on the opportunity and then colluded with the government to go from there. I mean,
we used to treat drug abuse for things like meth, for things like alcoholism, for things like pot use. That was all medical. It was a medical addiction that needed to be treated, just like getting diabetes or
now
heart
it's a
failure.
prison stint.
Now it's a prison stint.
Have fun with the shakes while you're going through withdrawals in your little prison
No,
cell.
screw that. You know how many drugs you can get and how many new drugs you can get addicted to in prison?
Oh, that's true.
Because
that's true.
guards have a fiduciary benefit to smuggle in drugs. So it's just a cyclical problem.
But hey,
But hasn't it created mass paranoia?
I would think so.
Everyone. The point I was trying to make is everyone, your generation, now my generation, because there aren't many before me. There's not even a generation left anymore. But in the current generations, everyone is hyper paranoid of every issue, everything. Your original thought was, how's the political arena and agenda changed? There is no correlation between my day and today's present time as far as politics, as far as people's mindset, how it relates to, again, the police state we're talking about, or just the sheer paranoia. How many laws are written in each session of each assembly in the state?
Oh, it's staggering. Now, there's one thing I want to bring up because it's constantly hotly debated topic, and a lot of people say, America's society's lost its morals and its values, and people like that piece of shit Mike Huckabee and Glenn Beck and some other guys will say, we need to bring back morals and values. We need to put God back in schools. And way back when in the 50s and everything, there was, I guess, some more religious following, and there was a lot more of religious people, I guess, that actually practiced it. But do you think would you blame that to cause and saying if we made everyone a Christian and made everyone go to church every Sunday, do you think that would improve our situation?
First of all, you shouldn't use the word Christian. You should use the word religion, because
right. I don't always mean to single out Christians. It just happens to be the predominant religion.
Because
so
believe it or not,
that surround you.
Believe it or not, real Christians are very tolerable and should be. But religious zealots and nuts that use Christianity as a prop are the ones that are the problem.
Right. Okay. But so I guess the original question is would bringing back and enforcing basically everyone in society into religion, basically stopping the degradates from their lifestyles, everything else, enforcing religion back into the country, and with government force everything else, do you think that would solve anything?
Yep. And the reason I say that is because you touched on it here before. You've created generations of financial gain, business, and everything else based on having no morals. If you could, and morals being selling drugs and incorporating little kids into these neighborhoods that are 8, 9, 10, 12 years old selling drugs. And like I say, we're into 7 generations now of social recipients and welfare recipients and on and on and on. It was the depletion of my generation depleted all morals in society. They didn't want any boundaries. They didn't want any guidelines. They didn't want absolutely, you're not answerable to anyone. Free. Everything, do what you want with no consequence. And then guess what happened? Once we all started turning 30, we became the major capitalist, where then it was all about the American buck and the dollar.
Well, then again, that's I guess it's a setup question where you've got a government that can enforce your moralist behavior and protect you from having morals. For me, and the way I see it, is if you have a completely free market and you don't have all these laws and restrictions, the market will dictate the morals, and you can control things a little bit better. But when you have monopolies on everything, you have the government basically protecting immoral behavior, protecting the banks, bailing out the banks that steal from people.
You want to know what an oxymoron is?
What?
A moral government.
Well,
but you just, in your defense of a moralless government, said that it will protect you from immoral behavior. So you can yourself not escape having a moral society. It doesn't have to be a religious society for it to be a moral society. The non-aggression principle says don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat.
Right.
Those are moral stances that are taught in the Christian faith or the Muslim faith or the Jewish faith, but they're also moral principles. You yourself, Maya, are a moral person. You may not read the Bible every day or have had religious training on a consistent basis that I'm aware of, but your word is your bond. When you say something, you mean it. You don't steal. You don't lie. You don't cheat.
And no,
but those are moral. Those are your personal principles and values. And when we as a society become unmoored from any kind of principles and values, it doesn't matter how free your market is. You're going to have a really rotten society. People like Sydney Leathers are the canary in the moral coal mine. This woman has no principles and values. Her only principle and value is getting famous to the point that she will send sexy pictures to a congressman so that she can then get rich doing a porno of herself for no other reason than she wants her VH1 TV show. That's the kind of person that is in politics today.
And that's what I'm saying is that government makes that happen. Is that you can't have a moral government, but when a government tries to enforce morals, it completely destroys everything. Like the point I made earlier is the more laws you pass, the more restrictions you have, the worse everything gets. If people are held to their own actions and their own responsibility, I mean, people do stupid stuff because they know they can get away with it. That that no one's gonna, the cops aren't gonna be called, or I can run the cops, or I can get out in court. So people do more things. If you had to deal with, say, back in your day when people didn't let shit like that happen, that said, just cut that shit out, stop being an idiot, or you handled it, you didn't have to worry about courts and lawyers and fees. People just knew that if you did stupid stuff, you weren't getting away with it.
Well, okay. First of all, we were a smaller collection, a smaller America. Now in major cities where you have entire parts of a city, take Chicago, Detroit, any major city, Los Angeles, you have entire landscapes that are where people have no morals, have no direction, have no hope. We're kind of talking from a strictly white bread standpoint, where we could dictate our authority on anyone.
How dare you? I'm 1/16 Cherokee in Choctaw.
I'm gonna scalp you later, just to let you know.
But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So
Well, then again, I think government's also to blame for a lot of that because we help support, and then we oppress those same groups of people that we, say like the black community, because the government is the police forces have. Historically, and then you look at the numbers, there's a lot more percentage-wise black people in prison there are white.
Well, I guess that's what I was trying to say. That's what I was saying. We've allowed everyone to be segmented, in basically in cesspools of both politically and moral corrupt areas of cities, and that's where it started to go downhill.
Yeah, I think without, I don't think that would necessarily happen to that scale without the government basically treating those people like cattle and forcing them to live in the one area or this area, and then the cops completely destroying the rest of whatever they have. I mean, what do you think, Chris? Do you think the government's to blame for that?
No, we are, because we get the government that we choose.
Oh, I didn't choose this government. I've never agreed to it. But
yeah, but you don't participate. You don't vote, so you are complicit.
I am,
and by not voting,
really? Wait, hold on.
By
Remember,
not voting, you are complicit because
so you agree with
by not exercising your values and principles at the ballot box. You are forcing inaction on me. You're forcing me to lose out support on people that we may agree with.
But you sitting right there, not making food and sending it to Africa, you are the reason children starve to death in Africa and people have AIDS.
No, that's not even comparable.
You did not.
That's not even comparable.
You didn't get a degree in science and cure AIDS.
I'm sorry. I just made a valid point, and you responded with a non-valid point.
No, inaction is not equal to action.
Yes, it is.
Really?
Yes, it absolutely
So
is.
me sitting here watching you, if you caught yourself on fire and you burned to death,
no, by not
watched
exercising your right to vote and upholding our principles and values at the ballot box and supporting the people that you agree with, you are are not increasing the support for our point of view. And
can I chime in one thing before you guys just get on this tangent forever? Not exercising your right to vote is an action. So let's be clear on that. Plus, that can also send a signal for, I'm not supporting a system I totally do not agree with. It's the same as this, if you want to be, say, a Christian, and then all of a sudden some mediocre Satanist comes in and rewrites the entire scripture, should you still participate in that church because you were in that church participating, or should you send your vote and cast your vote by abstaining?
No, but if your entire if your view is that the government is oppressing you, then why would you not want to
vote your own government in, or just participate in the 2 or 3 dysfunctional governments? Who would you? I don't even want to say this on a microphone, but I mean, who would I have voted for in the last election that had even remotely any of my ideals in play?
I would absolutely say Gary Johnson would have most of your ideals.
Now hold
So
on.
basically, I'm abstaining because I voted for Gary Johnson.
Well, no,
Because he didn't have a dog's chance in hell of ever getting anywhere in the election process.
What's hold on real quick is that when I vote and I vote for somebody, I am saying I am giving you all the powers that the government has right now. I elect to give you all of the powers that have been stolen from me. I'm going to go ahead and still let you have them. The government's stolen powers from me. I do not, okay, the Constitution, it's the powers given to the government. We as citizens give our power to the government when we give them, laws and their ability to tax us and everything else. I do not agree to that. Voting says I agree to the powers in which you have. Even if I like the person that's running is this great person, I am still electing to let them take my powers my rights as a human being.
No, what you're doing is you are letting powers accumulate with people who do not deserve to have power.
First of
they
all,
already have it.
You're
I'm not
enabling
agreeing
that.
to it, enabling it.
it was my generation's fault we created lawyers.
Yeah. No, but my not voting, you've created a binary now. You have voters
No,
and
I
non-voters. No, yes, you have. You created a binary where it's either voters or not voters. There's so much more to protecting and fighting for your rights than just voting. If you say if that's how you look at it and your only choice is to vote or not vote, then you should only be able to vote. You should only think about voting for people who can win and who can't win. So you should not ever vote for Libertarians because you technically threw away your vote because you know with a high probability your candidate will not win, which means you waste your vote on someone that cannot instill your values in the political process.
Well, maybe
there you
if
go.
more people like you actually had some common sense and voted, our side would have a chance
How
of
many?
winning.
I put 60, 70 hours a week into the Rupert campaign. What does a voter do? A voter sits there and gets their fat fucking ass up, and they go into a voting booth, pull a lever, and vote for a bunch of people they never knew. Why would I support that system? Why would I want to be a part of that and allow that to happen? It's absurd. The cat, the
First
cat
of all,
probably has a better
actually,
voice.
you both have very good points, and you're both right.
That's a cop out.
He's saying,
No, it's really not a cop out. I mean, I'm really listening and thought, but that you could literally banter back and forth for
oh, and
years
we will.
on this.
We will.
Okay, well, we're gonna end that there because me and Chris could go back about this like we always do forever because it's just like everyone else attacks me for not
Being
voting,
wrong.
but for being superior in intellect than you and moving on to the next
You're
step of human
superior in
evolution.
something, that's for sure.
This was episode 24, I think I said. We have big plans for the future with this show. I want to do a lot more live. I have business interests that I need to get all tied up, and I need to run my business before I do these side things. Unless you people start paying me to do this, then that's a completely different story. Definitely check out the WAL network. And Chris, what's that website?
WAL-radio.com.
And then also check out me at the Uncontrollables.com. I've got creatingmy.com. There's subscribe buttons everywhere.
I just upgraded your website a little bit and changed some few things around, so go check it out at creatingmaya.com.
It does. It looks a lot cleaner now. You can also check out Gary Snyder's show and Gary Snyder's network, Indiana Talks, at indianatalks.com. It's got a lot of great shows on there. He has a lot of people. A lot of them are idiots. Rob Kendall's one of them. Definitely, if you like my show, don't listen to his or you're going to pull your hair out. I do apologize that his book was advertised on my show last week. I had no control over that. I do not endorse his book or any of his products. I do like Gary Snyder, though. I like a lot of the other people on his network. So definitely check them out. Follow me on Twitter, on Facebook. Subscribe, like. I've got multiple pages out there. I've got one for the Creating My, got one for the Uncontrollables. Share it. Send it to everybody you know. If you're old and you're listening to this somehow, use your email or your texting messaging system that you
If
have
you
on
can
your
figure it
phone.
out, old timer.
Yeah, the NSA will read the email. So the more you send out emails and texts about me, the more they're going to look into me, the more fun I'm going to have with them. Hi to any of my IMPD friends that might be listening. I do love you guys. And our relationship is just now starting to blossom. So I look forward to that in the future. I think that's really about it. If you have anything you want to contribute to the show, if you want to be a guest, definitely find me on Facebook at Maya Axton. Find me on Twitter. Find me anywhere if you have anything you want to do. Remember, I will be doing live shows in the future, so prepare yourself to call in. Other than that, thanks, and go smoke weed.